Mr. Carter, if you can hear me, you need to wake up now. Emily Carter froze when she saw Annie standing beside the bed. What is she doing in here? Emily asked, looking at Maria, her tone controlled but tight with unease. Maria, this is a private floor. Only family is allowed here. I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter, Maria said quickly, her hands clasped together. She didn't mean any trouble. Annie just wanted to see Mr. Carter for a minute. Emily looked at the little girl again. And this time there was something different in her eyes. As if Annie's presence in the room complicated something. She did not want complicated. This really isn't appropriate, Emily said, forcing a small, polite smile. Mr. Carter is very ill. He needs rest, not excitement. Annie nodded respectfully. Yes, ma'am. I'll be quiet. Dr. Harris stood on the other side of the bed, reviewing the latest numbers on the monitor. He let out a slow breath and removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose before speaking. I want to be honest with all of you, he said gently. We've done everything we can. Neurology has run every scan, every test. His body is continuing to weaken, and we still don't have a cause we can reverse. At this point, we may need to consider moving him home. The hospital can't offer much more. Sometimes it's better for the patient to be in a familiar place, surrounded by family. Maria lowered her eyes. Emily nodded slowly, dabbing the corner of her eye with a tissue. Ryan shifted his weight and asked, So you're saying he's not going to wake up? Dr. Harris hesitated. I'm saying the chances are very, very small. Annie looked from the doctor to William Carter's face. The doctor then noticed Annie still standing there. He gave her a gentle smile. You don't need to do this, sweetheart. The doctors have tried everything. Talking to him won't change the medical situation, so you don't have to worry yourself. Annie looked at him seriously and shook her head a little. Yes, I do, she said. Annie carefully leaned down until her mouth was close to William's ear. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Mr. Carter, it's Annie, Maria's daughter. You ate my mom's cookies, remember? You said thank you. Annie swallowed, then whispered again, her voice trembling but determined. Mr. Carter, you need to wake up now, she said. I know what they're doing to you. I saw them. Your wife and your son. They meet a nurse in the back hallway. They give her money and change your medicine. Every day they put different medicine in your IV so the doctors can't fix you. They want you to get worse. They want you to die so they can take everything. Behind her, Maria froze. Emily's hand tightened around the tissue she was holding. Annie kept whispering, not looking at anyone else. I recorded them, she said, on my mom's old phone. I heard them say if you die, no one will know. They said it will look like you were just sick. Mr. Carter, you can't die. You have to wake up so we can tell the truth together. You have to wake up so we can show everyone what they did. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a tear slowly formed at the corner of William Carter's eye and slid down toward his temple. Annie saw it first. Mr. Carter, she whispered. His lips moved, just slightly. A faint, trembling motion, like someone trying to speak through deep water. Dr. Harris frowned and stepped closer. Hold on. Did you see that? William's mouth moved again. A dry, broken sound escaped his throat. Annie, Maria gasped softly. The nurse near the monitor stared, eyes wide, but Emily reacted first. Oh my God, she said quickly, stepping forward. Is that normal? Is that just a reflex? She looked sharply at the nurse just for a fraction of a second, but the look was clear. A signal, a warning. The nurse immediately nodded and spoke up, a little too quickly. Yes, that can happen. Sometimes patients in comas have reflex responses to familiar voices. It doesn't necessarily mean consciousness. Emily let out a breath, as if relieved. You see, she said gently, looking at Maria and then at Annie. Sweetheart, sometimes the body just reacts. It doesn't mean he's really awake. But Annie didn't move. She didn't step back. She looked at Dr. Harris instead. No, Annie said quietly but firmly. He heard me. He's trying to wake up. Dr. Harris looked from Annie to William, then back to the monitor. The heart rate had changed slightly. Not dramatically, but enough that he noticed. enough that it didn't fit perfectly with what he had been expecting. He leaned in and shined a small penlight into William's eyes. The pupils reacted slightly, but they reacted. The doctor's brow slowly furrowed. "That's not a typical reflex," he murmured. Emily's head turned toward him quickly. "Doctor, you said there was no response." "I said there was no consistent response," Dr. Harris replied slowly, still watching William's face. "This could be the beginning of neurological return. I can't be sure yet." Annie leaned close to William again, her voice very soft, very sure. "You see?" she whispered into his ear. "I told you. You can do it. You have to wake up. We still have work to do. We have to tell everyone the truth. We have to show them who hurt you. But you have to wake up first. You have to help me." Another tear slipped from the corner of William's eye. His lips trembled again. "Annie," he breathed, barely a sound, more air than voice. This time, Dr. Harris did not say it was a reflex. Dr. Harris had seen small improvements before in his career, tiny finger movements, changes in breathing. A flicker under the eyelids, but what he saw over the next few minutes was not random. Annie was still standing beside the bed, her small hand resting lightly on the metal rail. She didn't move away after William whispered her name. She stayed where she was, watching his face the way children watched something fragile, something that might disappear if they looked away for even a second. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, "it's okay. I'm still here." William's breathing changed. It was subtle, but everyone in the room heard it. The ventilator was still assisting, but now his chest was trying to move with the machine instead of just letting the machine breathe for him. His fingers twitched again, this time not just once, but twice, like someone trying to send a signal through a body that would not listen. Dr. Harris stepped closer quickly. "William, can you hear me? If you can hear me, try to move your hand." William's brow tightened slightly. It was a small movement, but it was there. A line forming between his eyebrows, like a man concentrating very hard. Emily felt a cold wave move through her stomach. "That doesn't mean he's conscious," she said quickly, looking at the nurse. "Right? This could still be involuntary." The nurse hesitated. "It could be," but she didn't sound sure anymore. Annie leaned closer again, her voice dropping to a whisper near William's ear. "You're doing it," she said. "Don't stop now. You have to wake up. Remember what I told you. They're hurting you. You have to wake up so we can stop them." William's heart rate climbed on the monitor slowly, but steadily. The beeping became closer together, more urgent, more alive. Dr. Harris looked at the screen, then at William, then back at the screen again. "That's stimulus response," he murmured. "He's reacting to her voice, specifically to her voice." Emily's hands tightened at her sides. "Doctor, you said there was brain damage." "I said there was severe neurological suppression," Dr. Harris replied. "That's not the same as brain death." Ryan pushed himself off the wall. "So what are you saying? That he's going to wake up and be normal?" "I'm saying," the doctor answered carefully, "that I may have been looking at this the wrong way. This doesn't look like typical degenerative disease progression. This looks like suppression. Chemical suppression is one possibility." The room went very still. Emily turned her head slowly toward the doctor. "Chemical? Are you suggesting someone did this to him?" "I'm suggesting," Dr. Harris said calmly, "that I want a full toxicology screen repeated immediately." The nurse looked at Emily without meaning to. It was just a quick glance, but Emily saw it. And in that moment, for the first time since William had been admitted, real fear appeared on her face. On the bed, William's lips moved again. No clear word this time, just a faint movement, like someone trying to push through heavy water. Annie saw it and leaned even closer, almost protectively, like she was shielding him from the rest of the room. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to talk yet. Just wake up first. We'll talk later. I'm not scared." William's eyelids fluttered, not fully open, just a tremor. But it was enough. Dr. Harris straightened immediately. "William, if you can hear me, try to open your eyes." Emily took a step back without realizing she was doing it. William's eyelids moved again. A slow, painful effort, like lifting something incredibly heavy. For a fraction of a second, his eyes opened, just slightly unfocused, glassy, but open. Annie gasped quietly. "You did it," she whispered. The eyes closed again almost immediately, but the room had already changed. Everything had changed. "That is not a reflex," Dr. Harris said firmly. "That is not involuntary. He is trying to wake up." Emily turned quickly to the nurse, her voice low and sharp. "He needs to rest. Too much stimulation could be dangerous." "You said that before." The nurse nodded quickly. "Yes, too much stress can be harmful for patients in critical condition. We should limit visitors." Annie looked up at them. "I'm not stressing him, I'm helping him." No one answered her. Dr. Harris checked William's pulse manually now, his fingers pressed against the wrist, counting, thinking. "This doesn't make sense with his previous labs," he said quietly. "If this were natural neurological failure, we wouldn't see this kind of response. Not like this. Not this fast." Emily forced a small laugh that sounded completely wrong in the quiet room. "Doctor, sometimes people just have moments before the end." "Doctor?" Harris looked at her, really looked at her this time. "In my experience," he said slowly, "people who are dying don't usually get stronger when someone talks to them. They fade. He's not fading right now. He's fighting." On the bed, William's fingers moved again, this time curling slightly, as if trying to grab something that wasn't there. Annie saw it and quickly placed her small hand on the blanket near his hand, not quite touching him, but close. "I'm right here," she said softly. "You're not alone. But you have to wake up soon, okay? Because they're getting scared now. And when bad people get scared, they do worse things." Emily's face went pale for just a second. Ryan noticed it. So did the nurse. Dr. Harris looked from Annie to William, then to the IV line, then to the medication chart hanging at the end of the bed. "I want all current medications reviewed," he said, "immediately. And I want that toxicology report rushed." Emily stepped forward. "Doctor, is that really necessary? I don't want him treated like some kind of experiment." Dr. Harris didn't look at her when he answered. He was looking at the IV bag, at the clear liquid dripping slowly down the line into William Carter's arm. "If someone were slowly poisoning a man," he said quietly, "it would look very similar to what I've been seeing for the past 3 weeks." No one spoke. Annie looked at William and whispered one more time, very softly so only he could hear. "You're not dying, Mr. Carter. You're waking up. If this moment touched your heart, take a second to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from, because your story and your voice matter too. And if you believe stories like this remind us that justice and kindness still exist in this world, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story." Dr. Harris did not leave the room for a long time after that. He stood beside the monitor, arms folded, watching numbers change that had not changed in days. William Carter's heart rate was still weak, still irregular, but it was no longer drifting downward. It was reacting, responding, fighting. Across the room, Emily Carter stood very still, her mind moving much faster than her body. She had spent 3 weeks preparing for a death. Paperwork had already been drafted, transfers planned, conversations held behind closed doors. She had been patient, careful, precise. But now the man in the bed was not dying the way he was supposed to. "Doctor," she said gently, breaking the silence, "if he's reacting this way, shouldn't he be sedated, so his body doesn't go into shock?" Dr. Harris didn't look at her. He was still looking at William. "No. If he's regaining consciousness, sedation would only push him back down again." The nurse shifted slightly beside the IV stand. "But he's been on neurological suppression medication for weeks," she said carefully. "If we stop suddenly, it could be dangerous." Dr. Harris turned his head slowly. "I don't remember prescribing neurological suppression at this level." The room went quiet again. Ryan spoke up quickly. "He was in pain earlier, right? You said his brain activity was unstable. Maybe another doctor ordered it." Dr. Harris walked to the end of the bed and picked up the medication chart. He flipped through the pages once, then again more slowly. "These dosages," he murmured, "these are high, higher than I would normally authorize for long-term use." Emily crossed her arms lightly. "Doctor, with all respect, you said yourself his condition was severe. We trusted the hospital to do what was necessary. Dr. Harris didn't answer immediately. He kept reading, his expression growing more serious with each page. On the bed, William tried to move again. Inside his body, everything felt heavy, like he was buried under wet concrete. He could hear voices, but they sounded far away, like people talking at the end of a long tunnel. He tried to open his eyes again, but the effort burned through his head like fire. Then he heard her voice. "I'm still here," Annie whispered. The words cut through the darkness like a thin line of light. He tried to move toward that voice, tried to follow it. His fingers twitched again, then curled slightly, as if trying to hold on to something. Annie saw it immediately. "He's trying to move again," she said. Dr. Harris looked up. "William, if you can hear me, try to squeeze your hand." William tried. Inside, it felt like trying to lift a mountain. His arm would not respond. His chest felt tight. His mouth tasted like metal and dust. But he focused on the small voice beside him. "Annie." He pushed everything he had left into his hand. The fingers moved, just a little, but they moved. The nurse inhaled sharply. Ryan went completely still. Emily's face lost color for just a second before she controlled it again. "That's voluntary movement," Dr. Harris said quietly. "He's not in a deep coma anymore." Annie leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "You're doing really good," she said. "But you have to keep going. You can't stop now." William tried to open his eyes again. This time, the darkness cracked a little. Light slipped through, blurry shapes, shadows moving. He couldn't focus, but he knew he wasn't alone. He tried to speak, but his throat only produced a rough, broken sound. Dr. Harris leaned closer. "Don't try to talk yet. Just focus on breathing." Emily suddenly stepped forward. "Doctor, I really think this is too much stimulation. He looks distressed. Maybe we should let him rest and continue this later." Annie looked up at her. For a moment, the room felt very strange, like two completely different worlds were standing on opposite sides of the same bed. "He's not scared," Annie said quietly. "He's trying to come back." Emily's smile tightened. "Sweetheart, you don't understand medical situations like this." Annie didn't argue. She just looked back at William and spoke softly again. "Mr. Carter, listen to me. You're in the hospital. You were very sick, but you're getting better now. The doctor is here. I'm here. You're not alone." William heard every word, and then he remembered. Fragments at first, a glass of water, a pill he didn't recognize, feeling tired, then weaker, then not being able to move. Voices in rooms, Emily's voice, Ryan's voice. Words like transfer, shares, signature, timeline, and a nurse. Always a nurse. His heart rate jumped suddenly on the monitor. Dr. Harris looked up sharply. "Easy, William." Slow breathing. Annie leaned closer. "It's okay. You don't have to be scared. We know what they did. I told the doctor we need to check your medicine." Emily's head snapped toward her. "What did you say?" Annie looked at her calmly. "I said we need to check the medicine." The nurse spoke quickly, stepping forward. "All his medications are standard for his condition." Dr. Harris looked at her. "Then you won't mind if we verify everything with toxicology?" The nurse didn't answer. On the bed, William finally managed to open his eyes a little wider. Everything was blurry, but he could see shapes now. A small shape beside him. Dark hair. Small hands. A yellow cardigan. Annie. His lips moved again, painfully slow. "What? Dr. Harris immediately poured a small amount of water onto a sponge and wet William's lips. "Just a little. You're doing fine. Don't try to talk too much." Emily took a step back. Ryan walked toward the window and stared out at the city, his jaw tight. Annie smiled a little when she saw William's eyes open. "See? I told you. You're not dying." William looked at her, his vision still blurry, but he could see enough to know she was real. He wanted to say thank you. He wanted to ask what she meant about the medicine. He wanted to ask how long he had been like this. But his body would not let him say any of those things yet. So he did the only thing he could do. Very slowly, with enormous effort, he moved his hand across the sheet just a few inches until his fingers touched the edge of Annie's sleeve. He couldn't hold on. He didn't have the strength. But he touched her sleeve, and Annie understood. "I know," she whispered. "I know." I'm not going anywhere. William Carter did not sleep that night. His eyes were closed most of the time, but he was no longer trapped in that deep, silent darkness. Now he floated somewhere in between sleep and waking, between weakness and will, between a body that would not obey and a mind that was beginning to understand something was very, very wrong. He could hear the machines, he could hear footsteps, he could hear voices in the hallway, and sometimes he could hear Annie. She had refused to leave until the nurse said visiting hours were over. Even then, she stood beside the bed, looking at him like she was trying to memorize his face so he wouldn't disappear again. You have to keep fighting, she whispered when the room was quiet and the adults were busy talking near the door. I told my mom we can't give up yet. You're the only one who can tell the truth. William tried to open his eyes again. This time he managed a little longer. The world came in pieces, light, shadow, shapes, colors. He saw the outline of a chair, the metal rail of the bed, and a very small figure sitting very straight, hands folded, like she was guarding something important. Guarding him. Across the room, Emily spoke in a low voice to the nurse. They thought no one could hear them over the machines. You said the dosage was enough, Emily whispered. It was, the nurse replied. But if he's building resistance, or if something changed in his metabolism. I don't want theories, Emily said quietly, her voice tightening. I want this handled. We can't do anything drastic now, the nurse said, not with the doctor watching the chart. Emily glanced toward the bed, toward William, then toward Annie. That girl shouldn't be in here, she said. Every time she talks, he reacts. The nurse followed her gaze. Annie was sitting very still, watching William like a night guard who took her job very seriously. She's just a child, the nurse said. Emily's eyes hardened slightly. Children repeat things they hear. Children notice things they shouldn't. On the bed, William heard every word. Inside his chest, something cold and heavy settled into place. Not fear, not yet. Something closer to confirmation. Annie had told the truth. He tried to move his hand again. It took everything he had. But this time his fingers moved more than before, sliding slightly across the sheet. Annie saw it immediately and leaned forward. You moved again, she whispered, smiling a little. That means you're getting stronger. William forced his eyes open again. This time he could see her face more clearly. Dark eyes, serious expression, a child trying very hard to be brave. He tried to speak, but his throat only produced a rough sound. Annie understood anyway. Don't talk, she said softly. The doctor said you need to get stronger first. Dr. Harris walked back into the room just then, holding a tablet with new lab results. He stopped when he saw William's eyes open. Well, he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. That's something I didn't expect to see today. He walked to the bed and checked William's pupils again, then his pulse, then the monitor. William, if you can understand me, blink once, the doctor said. William focused on the voice, on the instruction, on the idea that he needed this man to understand. He blinked once. Dr. Harris froze for a second, then nodded slowly. Good. That's very good. Emily stepped forward quickly. Doctor, what does that mean? It means he can hear us. It means he can understand us. It means he is not gone, Dr. Harris said. Then he looked directly at William. And it means if something was done to you, you may be able to tell us. The room went silent. Emily forced a small laugh. Doctor, you're talking like this is some kind of crime. Dr. Harris didn't smile. I'm talking like a man who has been trying to diagnose a disease that doesn't behave like a disease. He held up the tablet slightly. The preliminary tox screen shows traces of a sedative that is not on my original treatment plan. The nurse spoke quickly. That could be from the ER when he was first admitted. Sometimes medications. This wasn't from 3 weeks ago, doctor, Harris said calmly. This is recent. Repeated. Small doses over time. William closed his eyes slowly. So it was real. It wasn't just weakness. It wasn't just illness. Someone had been slowly shutting his body down while he lay in this bed. Unable to speak. Unable to move. Unable to stop them. And the only person who had tried to stop it was a 6-year-old girl. He opened his eyes again and looked at Annie. She leaned closer. I told you, she whispered. You're not crazy. You're not dying. They were making you sick. Dr. Harris looked between Annie and William. What did you tell him? He asked gently. Annie hesitated and looked at Maria, who had just re-entered the room after speaking with a receptionist about visiting hours. Maria looked nervous, but she nodded slightly. "Tell the truth," she said quietly. "So Annie did. I saw Mrs. Carter and Ryan talking to the nurse in the back hallway," Annie said. "They gave her money. I heard them say they were putting medicine in his IV so the doctors couldn't fix him. I recorded it on my phone." No one spoke for a few seconds. Dr. Harris looked at the nurse very slowly. The nurse's face had gone pale. Emily stepped forward immediately. "This is ridiculous. She's a child. She doesn't understand what she's saying." "She probably misunderstood a conversation." Annie shook her head. "I didn't misunderstand. I recorded it." William gathered every bit of strength he had left and moved his hand again, slowly, painfully, across the sheet toward Annie. This time, when his fingers reached her sleeve, they didn't just brush it. They held on, weakly, barely, but he was holding on, and everyone in the room saw it. Dr. Harris looked at that small hand holding the fabric of Annie's sleeve, then at William's eyes, then at Emily Carter, and in a very quiet voice, he said, "I think we need to talk about what's really been happening in this room." Dr. Harris did not raise his voice, but the authority in the room shifted the moment he spoke. "I think we need to talk about what's really been happening in this room." Emily Carter's expression did not collapse. She was too controlled for that. But something in her eyes changed, something sharp, something calculating, like a person quickly rearranging plans inside her head. "I don't know what you're implying, doctor," she said calmly, "but if you're suggesting that I would harm my own husband based on the story of a 6-year-old child, I think that's extremely inappropriate." Dr. Harris did not respond immediately. He looked at the IV line again, then at the medication chart, then at the nurse. "How long have you been assigned to Mr. Carter?" he asked her. The nurse swallowed. 2 weeks. "And during those 2 weeks, who authorized medication changes?" he asked. The nurse hesitated. The chart was updated, according to patient response. "By which doctor?" Dr. Harris asked. The nurse did not answer right away. Across the room, William was still holding Annie's sleeve with weak fingers, as if letting go would mean sinking back into the dark again. His eyes were open now, not fully clear, but aware. Watching, listening. Emily stepped in smoothly. "Doctor, this is turning into an interrogation. If there's a problem with hospital procedure, you should take it up with administration, not in front of my husband while he's in this condition." Dr. Harris looked at her. "Your husband is in this condition because something doesn't add up, Mrs. Carter. And I don't ignore things that don't add up." Ryan pushed himself away from the window. "What exactly are you accusing us of?" he asked, his tone sharper now. "I'm not accusing anyone yet," Dr. Harris said. "I'm saying the medication levels in Mr. Carter's system do not match the treatment plan I approved. I'm saying his symptoms match prolonged chemical sedation. And I'm saying he is showing signs of improvement now that we've reduced certain medications this morning." The room went quiet again. Annie looked from the doctor to William, then back to the doctor. "So that means he was getting worse because of the medicine?" she asked. Dr. Harris looked at her for a long moment before answering. "That's what I'm starting to believe." Maria felt her knees go weak and sat down in the chair near the wall. She had spent her life staying out of trouble, staying invisible, staying quiet in other people's houses. But now trouble had found her anyway, and it was standing in the middle of a private hospital room, wearing expensive clothes and speaking in calm voices. On the bed, William tried to speak again. His voice was still rough, broken, like something that had not been used in a long time. "Phone," he whispered. Dr. Harris leaned closer. "You want a phone?" William blinked once. Ryan immediately spoke. "He's not in any condition to be making calls." William's eyes moved slowly toward Ryan, and for the first time there was something clear in them. Not confusion, not weakness, recognition, and something else. Anger. Dr. Harris noticed it too. "I think we should give him what he's asking for," the doctor said. Emily stepped forward. "Doctor, he can barely speak." This could wait. William forced his fingers to tighten slightly on Annie's sleeve. It was a tiny movement, but it was deliberate. Annie looked at Dr. Harris. "He doesn't want to wait," she said quietly. Dr. Harris held William's gaze for a moment, then nodded. "I'll arrange for a supervised call," he said. "But first, I want that toxicology report finalized, and I want pharmacy to review every medication that's been administered in the last 3 weeks." The nurse spoke quickly. "Doctor, That could take time. Then start now, Dr. Harris said. Emily turned toward the nurse, and again there was that look, that silent, sharp look that said more than words. William saw that look, and in that moment, everything inside his mind lined up. The sudden illness, the weakness, the way Emily had insisted on handling his medication schedule at home before he was admitted, the way Ryan had suddenly started coming to the office more often, asking questions about voting shares and emergency succession clauses. He had built a financial empire from nothing. He had survived negotiations that destroyed other men. He had seen partners betray each other for less than what his company was worth. He knew what betrayal looked like. He just had never expected to see it standing at the foot of his own hospital bed. He turned his eyes slowly toward Annie again. She was still there, still standing beside him like a small guard who refused to abandon her post. He moved his lips again, trying to form the words. "Thank you." The sound barely came out, but Annie understood. Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "You're welcome," she whispered. "But you're not done yet. You still have to get better, and then we have to win." Across the room, Ryan let out a short breath. "This is insane," he muttered. "We're standing here taking legal advice from a child." "No," Dr. Harris said quietly. "We're standing here watching a patient who was supposed to be dying suddenly improve when someone started asking questions." Maria looked at William, at the machines, at the doctor, at Emily, and she realized something she had never imagined in her life. Power did not always look like money. Sometimes it looked like a man who couldn't move but refused to die. Sometimes it looked like a little girl who refused to be quiet. William's grip on Annie's sleeve loosened slightly as exhaustion began to pull him back toward sleep, but this time it was different. This time it did not feel like falling into a hole. This time it felt like resting before a fight. Just before his eyes closed, he looked at Annie one more time. She understood that look too. "Don't worry," she whispered. "I'm still here, and I'm not scared of them." William Carter closed his eyes, but this time, everyone in the room knew something had changed. He was no longer a dying man. He was a man who had just learned who his enemies were. William Carter slept for nearly 3 hours after that. Not the heavy, drowning sleep he had been trapped in for weeks, but a different kind of sleep, the kind where the mind is still working somewhere beneath the surface, sorting memories, replaying voices, putting pieces together. When he woke again, the room was dim. The evening lights of the city glowed through the tall windows, turning the glass into a wall of gold and blue. The machine still hummed, still blinked, still counted every heartbeat like a metronome measuring how much time a man had left to change his life. Annie was still there. She had fallen asleep in the chair beside his bed, curled up with her knees pulled close, her head resting against the side of the mattress. One of her small hands was still on the blanket near his arm, like she had been holding her place there even in her sleep. William watched her for a long time without moving. He could move a little more now. Not much. His fingers worked if he concentrated. His eyes could focus for short periods. His throat still burned when he tried to speak, but at least now sound came out when he tried. But what scared him wasn't the weakness. It was the memory. He remembered the glass of water Emily had brought him the night before he collapsed. He remembered the way she had insisted he take the new medication the private specialist had recommended. He remembered feeling tired the next day, then weaker the day after that, then forgetting meetings, then not being able to stand without help. And through all of it, Emily had been calm, patient, attentive, too attentive. His eyes moved slowly across the room. Dr. Harris was speaking quietly with another doctor near the door. Maria was sitting on the far side of the room, her hands folded tightly in her lap, like she was sitting in a church instead of a hospital. The nurse from earlier was gone. A different nurse stood by the station outside the glass wall. Emily and Ryan were not in the room. William felt a small wave of relief when he realized that. He tried to move his hand again. It took a long time, but eventually his fingers reached the edge of the blanket near Annie's hand. He tapped the blanket lightly. Once. No response. He tapped again, weaker this time. Annie's eyes opened immediately. For a second she looked confused. Then she saw his eyes open and she sat up straight so fast the chair made a soft scraping sound on the floor. "You're awake," she whispered, as if she was afraid saying it too loud might break it. William moved his lips. It took effort, but this time the word came out clearer. "Annie," she smiled, but her eyes filled with tears at the same time. "Yeah," I'm here. He swallowed, wincing slightly. Your phone. Annie looked around quickly, then reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out the old phone. The cracked screen lit up faintly in the dim room. I still have it, she said. I didn't show anyone else. William moved his eyes toward Dr. Harris, then back to Annie. He was trying to tell her something without speaking too much. Annie understood faster than most adults would have. You want the doctor to hear it? She asked quietly. William blinked once. Annie stood up and walked over to Dr. Harris. Doctor? She said softly. Dr. Harris turned and immediately walked over when he saw William's eyes open again. You're awake, he said, not hiding the surprise in his voice this time. That's very good. Annie held up the phone. I told you I recorded them, she said. Do you want to hear it now? Dr. Harris looked at the phone, then at Maria, then back at Annie. Yes, he said. I think I do. Maria stood up slowly and walked closer, her face pale but steady. Annie pressed the screen and opened the recording. The audio crackled for a second. Then the voices came through quiet, but clear enough in the silent room. Ryan's voice, just keep the dosage low enough that it looks natural. Emily's voice. The doctors already think it's neurological. They're not even looking at the IV. Then the nurse. As long as the payments continue, I'll keep changing the bag during night shift. The recording ended. No one spoke for several seconds. Dr. Harris took a very slow breath, then another. When he looked at William again, his expression had changed completely. He was no longer just a doctor looking at a difficult case. He was a man who had just heard evidence. I'm going to call hospital administration and security, he said quietly. And I'm going to order a full toxicology confirmation and preserve all medication records for legal review. Maria looked frightened. Are we in trouble? She asked. Dr. Harris shook his head. No. If this recording is real, you may have just saved this man's life. On the bed, William closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again and looked at Annie. Brave girl, he whispered. Annie shook her head a little. No, she said. You're the brave one. You're the one who has to fight them. Just then, the door opened. Emily walked in, Ryan right behind her. They both stopped when they saw everyone gathered near the bed, the phone in Annie's hand, and William awake, looking directly at them. For the first time since this all began, Emily Carter looked like a woman who had lost control of the story. William held her gaze. He could not sit up. He could not stand. He could barely speak, but his eyes were clear now, and they were no longer the eyes of a dying man. They were the eyes of a man who knew exactly who had tried to kill him, and who had just decided he was not going to die quietly. When Emily and Ryan walked into the room and saw William awake, the air changed so suddenly it felt like pressure dropping before a storm. Emily recovered first. She had always been quick at adapting when situations changed. That was one of the reasons William had once admired her. She did not panic. She did not raise her voice. She smiled and walked toward the bed as if nothing unusual had happened. William, she said softly, stepping close to him, you're awake. Oh my God, you had us so worried. William did not answer. He simply looked at her, really looked at her. For years, he had trusted this woman to stand beside him in rooms full of powerful men. He had trusted her signature on documents, her voice in private meetings, her presence in his home. He had believed that whatever else she was ambitious, cold, distant, she was still on his side. Now he looked at her and saw a stranger. Emily reached for his hand, but before she could touch him, William slowly moved his fingers away. The movement was weak, but it was clear. He did not want her to touch him. Emily's hand stopped in midair for a fraction of a second before she slowly lowered it, still smiling, but her eyes had changed. Ryan stepped forward. Hey, William, he said, trying to sound casual. You gave everyone a scare. William shifted his gaze to Ryan. He remembered teaching him how to read financial statements, remembered giving him a job when his last business failed, remembered paying off one of his gambling debts without telling Emily because he didn't want to embarrass her son. Ryan could not hold his gaze for long. He looked away first. Dr. Harris stepped between them slightly, not aggressively, but enough to change the balance in the room. Mr. Carter needs rest, the doctor said calmly. He's just regained consciousness. We'll need to limit stress and keep conversations short. Emily nodded immediately. Of course, his health is the most important thing, but her eyes moved quickly around the room, first to Annie, then to Maria, then to the phone still in Annie's hand, then back to Dr. Harris. "What's going on?" she asked lightly. "Why does everyone look so serious?" Dr. Harris held her gaze. "We're reviewing Mr. Carter's medication history." Emily did not blink. "That sounds like something you should have been doing already." "We were," Dr. Harris said. "But now we're doing it more carefully." William moved his lips slowly. It took effort, but he forced the words out. "Lawyer." Dr. Harris nodded immediately. "I understand. I've already contacted Daniel Brooks. He's on his way." Ryan's head snapped up. "You called his lawyer?" "Yes," Dr. Harris said, "at the patient's request." Emily's voice cooled slightly. "William just woke up. He's not in any condition to be making legal decisions." William gathered every bit of strength he had and spoke again, his voice rough but clear enough this time. "I am." The room went completely silent. It was the first full sentence he had spoken. Annie looked at him like she had just watched someone win a very hard race. Emily's smile disappeared completely now. "William, you're confused. You've been very sick." William looked at her and spoke slowly, each word costing him effort. "Not confused." Ryan shifted his weight. "Maybe we should all calm down," he said. "This isn't the place for drama." Annie spoke before anyone else could. "It is the place," she said quietly. "Because this is where you are trying to make him die." Maria closed her eyes briefly. The words were out now. There was no pulling them back. Emily turned her head slowly toward Annie. "That's a very serious thing to say," she said softly. "Do you even understand what you're accusing us of?" Annie didn't look away. "Yes." Dr. Harris stepped in again. "That's enough for now. Mr. Carter needs rest. And this conversation will continue later with hospital administration present." Emily crossed her arms. "Are we being accused of something, Doctor?" Dr. Harris answered calmly. "We are verifying medical facts. That's all." Just then, there was a knock on the door, and a tall man in a dark suit stepped into the room carrying a leather briefcase. Daniel Brooks. He looked older than William, remembered more gray in his hair, more lines in his face, but his eyes were still sharp, still observant. He took in the entire room in one glance. William awake. Emily standing near the bed. Ryan near the window. The doctor, Maria, and the small child standing beside the bed like she belonged there more than anyone else. "William," Daniel said, walking closer. "You look terrible." William would have laughed if his throat hadn't hurt. Instead, the corner of his mouth moved slightly. "Good to see you," he whispered. Daniel set the briefcase down and leaned closer so only William could hear him. "Dr. Harris told me enough to get me here fast," he said quietly. "Do you understand what's happening?" William blinked once. "Yes." "Do you want me to start making calls?" Daniel asked. William moved his eyes toward Emily and Ryan, then back to Daniel. "Yes." Daniel nodded once. That was all he needed. He straightened and looked at Emily and Ryan with polite professionalism. "I think it would be best if we gave Mr. Carter some space while we discuss his legal and medical situation," he said. Emily looked at him coldly. "I'm his wife." Daniel nodded. "And I'm his lawyer. And right now, he's my client before he's anything else in this room." No one spoke for a moment. Annie reached up and gently placed her small hand on the edge of the bed near William's arm again. "I told you," she whispered to him. "We're going to win." Daniel Brooks did not waste time. He pulled a chair close to the bed and opened his briefcase, taking out a yellow legal pad, a pen, and his phone. He had been William Carter's attorney for 12 years. He had seen hostile takeovers, divorce negotiations, government investigations, and boardroom betrayals. But he had never seen a case where his client had to nearly die to find out who was trying to destroy him. He leaned closer so William wouldn't have to strain his voice. "William, I need yes or no answers for now," Daniel said quietly. "Do you believe someone has been intentionally giving you medication to keep you unconscious?" William looked at him and blinked once. "Yes." Daniel nodded and wrote something down. "Do you believe the people responsible are in this room?" William's eyes moved slowly toward Emily and Ryan, then back to Daniel. He blinked once again. Yes. Across the room, Emily spoke, her voice tight but controlled. This is unbelievable. He can barely speak and you're conducting some kind of courtroom interrogation in a hospital room. Daniel didn't even look at her. I'm establishing legal clarity for my client. Ryan let out a short laugh. Your client is my stepfather. This is a family matter. Daniel finally looked up. Attempted murder is not a family matter, he said calmly. The word murder hung in the room like a sudden drop in temperature. Maria covered her mouth with her hand. Annie did not move, her eyes going from one adult to another, trying to understand how grown-ups could say such terrible things so quietly. Emily's face hardened. You're making a very serious accusation, Mr. Brooks. Daniel nodded. Yes, I am. Dr. Harris stepped forward. And from a medical standpoint, I can confirm that Mr. Carter's toxicology report shows repeated exposure to sedatives that were not part of my original treatment plan. The nurse who had been standing outside earlier was no longer there. A different nurse stood at the station now, and hospital security could be seen quietly speaking with someone down the hall. Emily noticed that too. She turned back toward William and changed her tone completely, softer now, almost pleading. William, she said, stepping closer to the bed again, you're confused. You've been very sick. People are putting ideas in your head. You know I would never hurt you. William looked at her for a long time. Then, slowly, painfully, he lifted his hand just a few inches and let it fall weakly back onto the bed. It was not a big movement, but it was enough to show that he was not confused. He was choosing not to take her hand. Daniel leaned closer again. William, I need to know about your will, he said quietly. Has anything been changed recently? Any new signatures? Any amendments? Any emergency transfer of authority? William swallowed, then forced the words out slowly. Documents. At home. Safe. Daniel nodded immediately and wrote that down. Good. We'll secure the house and the office tonight. Ryan's head snapped up. You're not going anywhere near that house without my mother's permission. Daniel looked at him calmly. Actually, I am. Because the house belongs to William Carter. Not you. Ryan took a step forward. You think you can just walk in and take over everything? Daniel met his gaze without raising his voice. I don't think anything. I follow the law. And the law says if someone attempted to murder my client to gain access to his assets, then everything you touch from this moment forward becomes evidence. Ryan stopped walking. Emily spoke again, more sharply now. This is harassment. Dr. Harris shook his head slightly. No, Mrs. Carter. This is what happens when medical evidence and legal evidence start pointing in the same direction. On the bed, William felt exhaustion pulling at him again, but he forced himself to stay awake. He looked at Annie and moved his fingers slightly, as if calling her closer. She stepped closer immediately. I'm here, she said. He tried to speak again. Phone. Annie. Daniel understood. He wants the phone again. Annie handed it to Daniel this time. Daniel played the recording once more, this time louder, letting every word fill the room. Ryan's voice. Just keep the dosage low enough that it looks natural. Emily's voice. The doctors already think it's neurological. They're not even looking at the IV. Then the nurse. As long as the payments continue, I'll keep changing the bag during night shift. When the recording ended, no one spoke. Emily's face had gone completely pale now, but she still tried one last time. This proves nothing, she said. Those voices could be anyone. That recording could be edited. This is a child with a broken phone. This is not evidence. Daniel closed the phone slowly and looked at her. You're right, he said calmly. By itself, it's not enough. He paused, but combined with unauthorized medication in his blood, altered dosage records, a nurse who suddenly changed shifts today, and a patient who wakes up the moment someone tells him he's being poisoned, it becomes a very different conversation. Annie looked at William again. We're doing it, she whispered. We're really doing it. William looked at her, and even though his face was still weak, something had returned to his eyes now. Control. He had built his entire life on control, on understanding risk, on knowing who to trust and who not to trust. He had trusted the wrong people, but the right person, a little girl with a cracked phone and a brave voice, had walked into his hospital room and told him the truth when he was too weak to find it himself. He moved his lips again, and this time the words were clearer than before. Annie, stay. She nodded immediately. I'm not going anywhere. Daniel closed his briefcase and stood up. This is going to become a legal matter very quickly, he said, which means from this moment on, no one changes his medication, no one enters this room alone, and every conversation is documented. Dr. Harris nodded. Agreed. Emily looked around the room and realized something she had not expected when she walked in that morning. She was no longer in control, and for the first time since this all began, William Carter was. When Emily and Ryan finally left the room that night, they did not argue anymore. They did not shout, did not threaten, did not defend themselves again. They simply walked out in silence, and that silence was more frightening than any argument, because silence meant they were thinking. And dangerous people were always most dangerous when they were thinking. Inside the room, the atmosphere changed the moment they were gone. Everyone breathed a little easier, but no one relaxed completely. Not Dr. Harris, not Daniel, not Maria, and not Annie. William lay still, exhausted from speaking more in 1 hour than he had in weeks. But his mind was fully awake now, moving quickly, calculating, remembering. Daniel pulled his chair closer again. William, we don't have much time, he said quietly. If they were willing to do this once, they may try something else. We need to secure everything, your company, your house, your accounts. But I need information. William nodded slightly. Can you confirm? Daniel continued. Your voting shares are still in your name. William swallowed, then whispered slowly. Yes, but temporary. Transfer. If incapacitated. Daniel's expression hardened. To Emily? William blinked once. Yes. Daniel exhaled slowly. Then we're on a clock. Maria looked confused. What does that mean? She asked. Daniel turned slightly, so she could understand. It means if William had died while legally incapacitated, control of his company would temporarily transfer to Emily. If that transfer stayed in place long enough, it could become permanent depending on how the board voted. Maria's face went pale. So if he died, they would own everything. Daniel finished. Annie looked at William. That's why they didn't want you to wake up, she said quietly. William looked back at her and blinked once. Yes. Dr. Harris crossed his arms. From a medical standpoint, I can keep him here and restrict access. But this is no longer just a medical situation. This is legal. Daniel nodded. And financial. And criminal. William forced himself to speak again. Board. Meeting. Daniel understood immediately. When? William struggled to remember. Everything from the past few weeks felt like it was covered in fog, but he forced himself to focus. Friday. Daniel checked his watch automatically even though he already knew the day. That's in 3 days, he said quietly. If they convince the board you're not mentally competent, they can vote to keep control. Maria looked from one man to the other. But he is competent, she said. He's talking. He understands everything. Daniel gave a small, sad smile. In the world William lives in, understanding isn't enough. You have to prove it. On paper. In front of witnesses. In front of people who care more about money than truth. Annie frowned. That's not fair. Daniel looked at her. No, he said. It isn't. On the bed, William slowly moved his hand again, searching for Annie's sleeve like he had done before. When his fingers touched the fabric, he held on weakly. Annie looked down at his hand, then at him. You want me to stay? She asked. He blinked once. Daniel watched that small interaction and shook his head slightly in disbelief. You know, he said quietly, I've been in rooms with senators, CEOs, and investment bankers, and right now, the only person in this room who seems completely sure of what to do is a 6-year-old girl. Annie thought about that seriously for a moment. Then she said, We tell the truth, and we don't let them lie. Daniel nodded slowly. That's actually a very good legal strategy. Dr. Harris checked William's monitor again. He needs rest, the doctor said. Real rest. His body is still very weak. If we push him too hard, we could lose the progress we've made. Daniel stood up. Then we work while he rests, he said. I'm going to the house tonight to secure documents and computers. I'll also file a temporary legal protection order so no one can move assets or make medical decisions without a second opinion. Ryan's voice suddenly came from the doorway. You're not going anywhere near that house. Everyone turned. Ryan was standing just outside the door. His expression completely different now. No more pretending. No more polite stepson. His face was tight with anger. You think you can just walk in and take everything? Ryan said. You think one recording from a kid and a sick man opening his eyes changes anything? Daniel walked toward the door slowly, very calm. It changes everything, he said. Because he didn't die. Ryan laughed once, but there was no humor in it. He's still weak. He can't run a company from a hospital bed. From the bed, William spoke again, his voice rough but filled with something new. Watch me. Ryan looked at him, and for the first time, he looked uncertain, just for a second, but everyone saw it. Daniel opened the door and stood face to face with Ryan. You should get a lawyer, Daniel said quietly. A very good one. Ryan didn't move. This isn't over, he said. Daniel nodded. No, he agreed. It's just getting started. Ryan looked past him, into the room. At William lying in the bed. At Annie standing beside him. At Maria sitting quietly. At Dr. Harris reviewing the chart. Then he turned and walked away down the hallway without another word. When the door closed again, the room felt very quiet. William looked at Annie and whispered, "Not scared." Annie shook her head. "Me neither," she said. Then she leaned closer and whispered so only he could hear, "Because bad people get scared when the truth wakes up." William Carter closed his eyes again, but this time he wasn't slipping into darkness. He was gathering strength, because in 3 days, he would have to stand if not on his feet, then with his voice and take back everything that had almost been stolen from him while he lay there unable to move. And he was no longer fighting alone. The next morning, the hospital room no longer felt like a place where a man was waiting to die. It felt like a command center. Daniel arrived before sunrise with 2 phones, a laptop, and a stack of documents. Dr. Harris had already spoken to hospital administration, and a note had been placed in William's file. No medication changes without dual authorization. No visitors alone. All night shift activity recorded. Someone had even assigned a different nurse, an older man named Carl, who spoke very little but checked every IV line twice and wrote everything down. William was awake when the sun came up. Weak, but awake. Annie was sitting in the chair again, eating a banana Maria had brought from home. She swung her legs gently under the chair and watched William like she was making sure he didn't disappear again. "You look better," she told him. William tried to smile. It was still a small smile, but it was real. "Feel better," he whispered. Dr. Harris walked in with a tablet. "Your latest labs are back," he said. "The sedative levels in your blood have dropped significantly since we stopped the previous IV bags. Your neurological response is improving faster than I expected." William closed his eyes briefly. That was all the confirmation he needed. They had been poisoning him. Slowly. Carefully. Patiently. Daniel opened his laptop and turned the screen so William could see. "I spoke to the board this morning," he said. "They moved the meeting up. It's now tomorrow afternoon." Maria looked shocked. "Tomorrow? That's so soon." Daniel nodded. "That's not a coincidence. That's pressure. They want to vote before William is strong enough to stop them." William forced himself to focus. "Video," he whispered. Daniel nodded immediately. "Yes, that's what I told them. You'll attend by video. You don't need to stand. You don't need to walk. You just need to be able to speak and prove you are mentally competent." Dr. Harris crossed his arms. "Medically, I can support that. He is conscious, oriented, and responding appropriately. I can sign a statement confirming cognitive competence." Annie raised her hand slightly like she was in school. "What does that mean?" Daniel smiled a little. "It means he's awake enough and thinking clearly enough that no one else is allowed to take his company away from him." Annie nodded seriously. "Okay. Good." William looked at her and whispered, "You, coming, tomorrow." Annie blinked. "To the meeting?" He blinked once. Daniel chuckled softly. "Honestly, at this point, I think you might be the most important person in the room." Maria looked nervous. I don't know if we should be involved in something like that. These are very powerful people. William slowly turned his head toward her. It took effort, but he held her gaze. Family, he whispered. Maria didn't understand at first. Family? William moved his eyes toward Annie, then back to Maria. You, both. Maria's eyes filled with tears immediately. She had cleaned this man's house, washed his dishes, folded his shirts. She had never once imagined he even knew what her life looked like outside those walls, and now he was calling her family. She nodded slowly. Then we're not going anywhere, she said. Around noon, Daniel came back into the room after making several calls in the hallway. His face was serious, but there was a certain energy in the way he moved now. I have news, he said. Everyone looked at him. The nurse who was on night shift the past 2 weeks, Daniel continued. She's gone. Didn't show up today. Phone disconnected. Dr. Harris frowned. That doesn't look good. Daniel shook his head. No, it looks like someone realized we're no longer guessing. We're proving. William closed his eyes slowly. Emily was not the kind of person who panicked. If the nurse had disappeared, it meant Emily was already trying to clean up the mess. House, William whispered again. Daniel nodded. I went there this morning. The safe in your office was open. William's eyes snapped open. Relax, Daniel said quickly. They didn't get what they needed. Your primary documents weren't there. William exhaled slowly, a small breath of relief. Bank, he whispered. Daniel nodded again. Already handled. I froze any transfer over a certain amount and flagged all authorization requests. If anyone tries to move money right now, it triggers a review. Annie listened to all of this like it was a movie, but she understood one thing very clearly. They're trying to run away, she said. Daniel looked at her. Yes, he said. Or they're trying to take as much as they can before the door closes. William looked at Annie again. Tomorrow, he whispered. We finish. Annie leaned closer so only he could hear her. You just talk, she whispered. I'll be right there. And if you get tired, I'll squeeze your hand so you remember you're not alone. William looked at her for a long moment. Then he used all his strength to move his hand across the blanket again until his fingers found her sleeve. This time, his grip was a little stronger, not strong enough to hold on forever, but strong enough to promise that he wasn't going to let go without a fight. Tomorrow was not just a board meeting. Tomorrow was the day a man who was supposed to die would speak. And when he spoke, a lot of very dangerous people were going to lose everything. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. At 1:10 p.m., a nurse helped William sit up for the first time. The effort nearly exhausted him. His muscles trembled from the strain, and a cold sheen of sweat formed on his forehead, but he did not ask to lie back down. Leave me like this, he said hoarsely. Dr. Harris stood nearby, watching carefully. Only for a short time. Your body is still recovering. William nodded slightly. Short is enough. Daniel was setting up the laptop on the rolling hospital table, adjusting the camera angle so the screen would show William sitting upright, not lying in bed. Image mattered. In William's world, image was sometimes the difference between control and collapse. Annie stood on the other side of the bed, watching everything very seriously. What happens if they try to say you're still too sick? She asked. Daniel glanced at her. Then your friend here, he said, nodding toward Dr. Harris. We'll tell them that Mr. Carter is fully conscious and mentally competent. Dr. Harris gave a small nod. I've already written the statement. William looked at Annie and moved his hand slightly. She understood and stepped closer so he wouldn't have to reach far. You ready? She asked quietly. He looked at her for a long moment, then whispered, ready. At 1:58 p.m., Daniel clicked the link. The screen filled with faces, men and women in conference rooms, office chairs, glass walls, city skylines behind them, the board of Carter Capital. William had sat at the head of that boardroom table for 15 years. He knew every face on that screen. He knew which ones were loyal, which ones were cowards, and which ones would follow whoever they believed was going to win. For a moment, no one spoke. Then one of the board members, an older man named Whitman, leaned forward toward the camera. William, he said slowly, we were told you were incapacitated. William took a slow breath. His voice was still rough, but it was steady. I was, he said. I'm not anymore. Another board member spoke. We were also told your condition was degenerative, that you might not recover. William looked straight into the camera. You were told a lot of things. Daniel stood just out of frame, where only William could see him, ready to step in if William lost strength. Whitman spoke again. Emily has been acting under temporary authority while you were hospitalized. The board scheduled this meeting to discuss long-term leadership stability. William almost smiled at the words leadership stability. In business language, that meant they were preparing to replace him. I know why you scheduled this meeting, William said. So let's not pretend this is about stability. This is about control. On the screen, a few faces shifted uncomfortably. William continued, speaking slowly but clearly. 3 weeks ago, I got sick. Very sick. I lost the ability to walk, then to speak, then to move. Doctors couldn't explain it. He paused to catch his breath. Annie quietly reached over and touched his sleeve, just for a second, reminding him she was there. He continued, Yesterday I woke up, he said, and we found sedatives in my blood that were never prescribed as part of my treatment plan. Now the screen went very still. Whitman frowned. Are you saying? I'm saying, William interrupted. Someone has been slowly poisoning me. The word landed heavily in every room connected to that call. Daniel stepped slightly into frame. For the record, he said, we have toxicology reports confirming repeated exposure to unauthorized sedatives. And we have an audio recording that suggests deliberate tampering with Mr. Carter's 4 medication. A woman on the board spoke sharply. This is a very serious accusation. Daniel nodded. Yes, it is. William looked directly into the camera again. I built this company from nothing. Every person on this call knows that. And every person on this call knows I would never step away from this company willingly. He paused again, breathing slowly, gathering strength. I was removed, he said. I was removed by people who thought if I couldn't speak, I couldn't fight back. On the screen, someone asked quietly, Do you know who did it? William did not look away from the camera when he answered. Yes, he said. There was a knock on the hospital room door at that exact moment. Dr. Harris turned, and a hospital security officer stepped inside and walked quietly to Daniel, handing him a folder. Daniel opened it, read the first page quickly, then looked at William and gave a small nod. Then he turned the laptop slightly so the microphone would catch his voice clearly. I believe this meeting just became a legal matter, Daniel said. Hospital security has located and detained the nurse responsible for administering the unauthorized medication. She has provided a statement. On the screen, several board members leaned forward at once. Whitman spoke. A statement saying what? Daniel looked directly at the camera. A statement saying she was paid to change Mr. Carter's 4th medication every night. Daniel said. Paid by Emily Carter and Ryan Carter. In the hospital room, Annie tightened her hand slightly on William's sleeve. On the screen, everything exploded into noise, people talking at once. Questions, disbelief, anger. William didn't say anything for a few seconds. He just watched them. Then he leaned slightly closer to the camera and spoke in a voice that was still weak, but carried something stronger than volume. Authority. This meeting is over, William Carter said. I'm not stepping down. I'm not transferring control. And when I'm out of this hospital, anyone who helped them will answer to me personally. He reached forward with a shaking hand and ended the call himself. The screen went black. The room was silent for a moment. Annie looked at him and smiled. I think you won, she said. William looked at her, exhausted, relieved, and for the first time in a very long time, something close to peaceful. No, he whispered. We won. After the call ended, the room stayed quiet for a long time. Not the heavy, fearful silence from before, but a different kind, the silence that comes after a storm has passed, but before anyone is quite sure what the world looks like now. William leaned back against the pillows, exhausted. The effort of sitting up, speaking, and holding himself together through the board meeting had taken nearly everything he had left. His hands were shaking slightly, and his breathing was shallow, but his eyes were clear. Daniel closed the laptop slowly. That, he said, was one of the most important meetings of your life. William closed his eyes for a moment. Over? He whispered. Daniel nodded. The vote won't happen now, not after that. No board in the world is going to transfer control away from a CEO who was just almost murdered for his shares. Dr. Harris stepped forward and gently checked William's pulse again. "You need to rest now," the doctor said. "What you just did would be exhausting for a healthy man. For someone who's been fighting sedation for 3 weeks, it's almost unbelievable." William opened his eyes again and looked at Annie. She was still standing beside the bed, exactly where she had been since the call started, like she had been holding the entire room together, just by refusing to leave. "You did it," she said quietly. William looked at her for a long moment. "You did," he replied. Before Annie could answer, the door opened again. This time it wasn't Emily or Ryan. It was 2 hospital security officers and a woman in a dark suit carrying a folder and a badge. "Mr. Carter?" the woman said. "My name is Laura Mitchell. I'm with the district attorney's office. We need to ask you a few questions, if you're able." Daniel nodded. "You can ask. He may not be able to answer everything yet." Laura stepped closer to the bed, her voice calm and professional. "Mr. Carter, we've taken a statement from the nurse who administered your medication. She confirmed she was paid to alter your IV sedatives over a period of approximately 3 weeks." William's jaw tightened slightly. Laura continued. "She also stated that the payments came from an account controlled by Mrs. Emily Carter, and that Ryan Carter was present during several of the exchanges." Maria covered her mouth again, even though she already knew the truth. Hearing it spoken out loud by someone with a badge made it feel heavier, more real. Laura looked at William gently. "We will be pressing charges for attempted murder, conspiracy, and medical fraud. But we need you to confirm something important. Did you ever authorize anyone to manage or change your medication outside of your primary physician's orders?" William forced the words out slowly. "No." Laura nodded and wrote that down. "Thank you. That's very important." Annie looked at the woman and asked quietly, "Are they going to jail?" The adults in the room exchanged looks. It was a child's question, simple and direct, but the answer carried the weight of everything that had happened. Laura looked at Annie for a moment before answering. "If the court believes the evidence, then yes," she said gently. "They could go to prison for a long time." Annie didn't smile. She didn't look happy. She just nodded once, very seriously, like she was filing that information away in the part of her mind where grown-up truths went. William watched her reaction carefully. "Not happy," he whispered. Annie shook her head. "No," she said. "I just wanted them to stop hurting you." No one in the room spoke for a few seconds after that, because that was the difference between a child and an adult. The adults in the room were thinking about prison, lawsuits, money, control, power. Annie had only ever been thinking about one thing: stop hurting him. Laura closed her folder. "We'll have officers stationed outside your room for the next few days," she said. "No one enters without clearance, not even family." Daniel nodded. "Good." After she left, the room became quiet again. Maria walked slowly to the bed and looked at William. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "Our lives, we were just trying to survive. We never expected to be part of something like this." William looked at her for a long moment, then slowly moved his hand again across the blanket until it rested near hers. "You stayed," he whispered. Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Of course we stayed." William then looked at Annie again. He studied her face like he was trying to memorize it, the same way she had once stood and memorized his when he was the one disappearing. "Why?" he whispered. "Help. Me." Annie thought about that question very carefully before answering. Finally she said, "Because you said thank you to my mom when no one else did." William felt something in his chest that had nothing to do with illness or medicine. In all his life, he had signed contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He had negotiated deals that changed entire companies. He had fired people, hired people, built things, destroyed things, won battles no one else even knew he was fighting. And in the end, the reason he was still alive was not money, not power, not influence. It was because one day, in a kitchen, he had said thank you to a woman most people didn't even see. William closed his eyes, but this time there was no pain in his face, only exhaustion and something close to peace. He moved his hand again, slowly, until his fingers touched Annie's hand. This time, his grip, though still weak, was steady. "Family," he whispered, and Annie squeezed his hand back like she understood exactly what that word meant. The hospital room was quieter the next morning, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the quiet of waiting for someone to die. The quiet of waiting for life to begin again. Sunlight came through the tall windows and fell across the floor in long golden lines. Someone had opened the blinds halfway, and the city looked different in the morning, less dramatic, more honest. Cars moved, people walked, and somewhere down below, a man was selling coffee from a street cart like he did every day, not knowing that high above him a man who owned half the buildings in his view was learning how to hold a spoon again. William sat up in bed with help from the nurse and a physical therapist. His hands were still weak, but he could move them now. Slowly, carefully, like someone learning how to use his own body again. Again, the therapist said gently. William lifted his hand a few inches, held it there, then slowly lowered it back down. The effort made his arm tremble, but he didn't stop. Across the room, Annie was sitting at the small table drawing on a piece of paper with a box of hospital crayons someone had given her. Maria sat beside her, filling out some paperwork Daniel had brought that morning. "What are you drawing?" William asked, his voice still rough but much clearer now. Annie held up the paper. It was a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands. One very tall, one medium, one very small. Above them was a big sun in the corner, and something that looked like a very crooked building. "That's you," Annie said, pointing to the tall one. "That's my mom. And that's me. And that's your big building." William studied the drawing for a long moment like it was the most important document he had ever seen. "Where are we going?" he asked. Annie thought for a moment. "Home," she said. The words stayed in the air between them. William had several homes. A penthouse in Manhattan, the estate in Westchester, a house in Aspen, an apartment in London. But he knew that wasn't what she meant. Dr. Harris walked in with a chart and a small smile. "You're improving faster than expected," he said. "If you keep this up, you may be able to leave the hospital in a couple of weeks." "A couple of weeks," Maria repeated softly, as if she couldn't quite believe how much had changed in such a short time. Daniel arrived a few minutes later, still in his suit, still carrying too many papers. He looked like a man who had not slept much, but he also looked satisfied. "I have updates," he said. William looked at him. "Tell me." Daniel set the papers down. Emily and Ryan were formally charged this morning. Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and financial manipulation. Their accounts have been frozen. The board voted unanimously to return full control to you, effective immediately. Maria let out a slow breath and sat down in the chair like her legs had suddenly stopped working. "It's over?" she asked. Daniel shook his head slightly. "The court case will take time, but the company is his. Again." They lost. William leaned back slightly, absorbing that. He had spent his whole life fighting for control, protecting control, building control, and he had almost lost it all because he trusted the wrong people. He looked at Annie. She was still holding the drawing. "Come here," he said softly. She walked over and stood beside the bed. He looked at the picture again. "You drew us holding hands," he said. Annie nodded. "Because that's what we did." William frowned slightly. "When?" "When you were sleeping," Annie said. "I held your sleeve so you wouldn't be alone, and you held my sleeve so you wouldn't be scared. That's like holding hands." William felt his throat tighten, and this time it had nothing to do with the illness. Daniel looked down at the drawing, then at William. "You know," he said quietly, "I've watched men spend their entire lives trying to figure out who they can trust. Most of them never really know." William nodded slowly. "I know now." He looked at Maria. "How long have you worked for me?" he asked. Maria looked surprised by the question. "Almost 2 years," she said. "Why?" William thought for a moment before answering. "In 2 years, you never lied to me. You never tried to take anything from me. You just worked, took care of your daughter, went home, came back the next day, and did it again." Maria didn't know what to say to that. William looked at Annie again. "And you," he said, "you walked into a room full of people who were richer and more powerful than anyone you knew, and you told the truth anyway." Annie shrugged a little. "It was the right thing," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. William nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "It was." He looked out the window at the city for a long time before speaking again. "I spent my whole life building an empire," he said quietly. "I thought being powerful meant no one could hurt you. I thought money made you safe. He paused, then shook his head slightly. But money didn't save me, he said. Power didn't save me. A little girl with a broken phone saved me. Annie looked at him. And my mom, she added. William smiled. And your mom, he agreed. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Daniel. I want to change something, he said. Daniel immediately reached for his pen. What do you want to change? William looked at Annie and Maria, then back at Daniel. My will, he said. My foundation, my houses, my time, all of it. Daniel watched him carefully. That's a big decision. William nodded. Almost dying changes your schedule. Annie didn't understand everything they were talking about, but she understood one thing very clearly. He wasn't going to be alone anymore, and neither were they. William Carter left the hospital on a quiet morning 3 weeks later. There were no reporters, no cameras, no public statement. Daniel had arranged everything that way. After what had happened, William did not want his first steps back into the world to be a performance. He had performed enough in his life in boardrooms, in negotiations, in interviews where people asked him how it felt to be a self-made billionaire, as if success were a story and not 1,000 small sacrifices no one ever saw. This time he wanted something different. He walked slowly, still weaker than he liked, one hand lightly gripping a cane the physical therapist insisted he use. Maria walked on one side of him, not touching him but close enough that he would not fall without someone noticing. Annie walked on his other side, holding a small paper bag with his discharge papers like it was the most important job in the world. You ready? Annie asked as the elevator doors opened to the lobby. William looked down at her and smiled. Yeah, he said. His voice was stronger now. Not perfect, but his again. I think I am. Outside, a black car waited, but William did not get in immediately. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment and just looked at the city. People walked past without recognizing him. A man in a delivery uniform carried boxes into a building across the street. A woman argued with someone on her phone. A taxi honked. Somewhere, someone was laughing. Life, he realized, had continued very normally while he lay in a bed, unable to move, unable to speak, while people he trusted planned how to take everything he had built. He looked down at Annie. You know, he said, when I was your age, my dad used to fix cars in a small garage. I used to sit on a stool and hand him tools. I thought he was the strongest man in the world. Was he? Annie asked. William thought for a moment. Yeah, he said. Not because he could lift heavy things, because he never let bad days make him a bad man. Annie nodded like she understood that completely. They got into the car. Instead of giving the driver the address to the penthouse in Manhattan or the estate in Westchester, William gave a different address. Maria noticed immediately. That's not your house, she said. William shook his head. No, he said. It's yours. Maria frowned, thinking she had misunderstood. I don't understand. William looked at Annie, then back at Maria. I had Daniel buy the building last week, he said. The one where your apartment is. The landlord who kept raising the rent? He doesn't own it anymore. Maria stared at him, unable to speak. You won't be evicted, William continued. The rent will stay the same for everyone in the building. And the ground floor apartment is empty. It's bigger, better light. Annie should have a room with a window. Maria's eyes filled with tears so quickly she had to look down at her hands. Mr. Carter, we can't accept something like that. William shook his head. You already did something like that, he said quietly. You let your daughter walk into my hospital room when everyone else was ready to let me die. Annie looked between them. Does this mean we're neighbors now? She asked. William laughed softly. Yeah, he said. Something like that. A few weeks later, when William returned to the Carter Capitol building for the first time, the entire executive floor went silent when he walked out of the elevator. People who had already started adjusting to a world without him suddenly found themselves standing in front of the man they had almost buried. Whitman was the first board member to walk toward him. You look thinner, Whitman said. William nodded. Almost dying will do that. Whitman hesitated, then said quietly, I'm sorry we believed you were gone. William looked at him calmly. Next time, don't believe anything until you hear it from me. Whitman nodded once. Understood? William walked into his office and stood there for a long time, looking at the desk, the windows, the city below. Everything was the same. But he wasn't. Daniel walked in a few minutes later. The foundation paperwork is ready, he said. Free clinics, legal aid funding, and a program specifically for domestic workers and their families. Scholarships, too. William nodded. Good. Daniel watched him for a moment. You're really changing everything, aren't you? William looked out the window again. I built my whole life making money, he said. Now I want to build something that makes sure what happened to me doesn't happen to someone who doesn't have a lawyer, a doctor, and a little girl to save them. That evening, William went to the Bronx. Not in a suit. Not with security walking in front of him. Just William, Daniel, Maria, and Annie, carrying a small box of cookies Maria had made in a brand new kitchen that still smelled like fresh paint. They sat in the new apartment on the second floor, eating cookies and drinking milk like it was the most normal thing in the world. Annie sat on the floor drawing again. What are you drawing now? William asked. Annie held up the picture. This time it wasn't stick figures. It was a big man lying in a bed, a small girl standing next to him, and a long line connecting their hands. Above them she had written, in careful, uneven letters, sometimes the person who saves your life is not the strongest one in the room, it's the one who refuses to leave. William looked at the drawing for a long time without speaking. Then he folded the paper carefully and put it in his pocket like it was something valuable. Because it was. Years later, when people asked William Carter what the most important moment of his life had been, they expected him to talk about his first $1 million, or the day his company went public, or the biggest deal he ever closed. But he never talked about those things. He always told them about a hospital room, when he couldn't move, couldn't speak, and everyone was waiting for him to die. And a 6-year-old girl leaned down and whispered in his ear, telling him it was time to wake up. And he did. Not because he was the strongest man in the room, but because, for the first time in his life, he wasn't fighting for money. He was fighting for people, and that made all the difference. This story teaches us that kindness is never a small thing, and respect is never wasted. William Carter was a powerful man with money, influence, and control, yet none of those things saved his life when he was lying in a hospital bed, unable to speak or move. The person who saved him was not a doctor, not a lawyer, and not someone powerful. It was a little girl who simply refused to ignore what was wrong. The lesson is simple but powerful. In a world where many people stay silent because they are afraid, the ones who change everything are often the ones who tell the truth, stand by the weak, and refuse to walk away. Real strength is not about power or money, but about loyalty, courage, and the choice to do what is right even when it is difficult. And sometimes, the people who save our lives are the ones we once thought we were helping. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.